Well, Ben, very good to see you today. You have the most fantastic title. You're if I remember this right, you're the Bodley Fellow and the Reed Rubin Organist and Director of Music, and the Stipendiary Lecturer. Have I got that right?
Right, yeah.
At Merton College, Oxford. I wonder if we could start by asking you what that role entails, because you're a busy man.
So the main part of the job is directing the chapel music, and it has a slightly elaborate title because my post was endowed by a wonderful American, Reed Rubin. He's a great supporter of the choir, and he endowed this post, I think, about 10 years ago. So, in the American way, his name is attached to the post. But it's wonderful that we see Reed quite often over here, but also we've been to sing to him in America a few times. And he's played a major role really in helping develop the music here, and encouraging us to do all sorts of things. So I'm very grateful to him. But I also do some undergraduate teaching. But in terms of the chapel music, there are two choirs. There's the college choir, which is a fairly typical undergraduate choir, 30 voices, um, students studying a whole range of subjects, most of them at Merton. There's certainly a number at other colleges. That's thanks to how the admissions system works at Oxford now. But there's nothing I can do about that. And then I also direct the girl choristers, and that's a choir we started 5 years ago. And the girls come from about 10 different schools across Oxford, and they come to the college twice a week, singing evensong every Wednesday during term. And the addition of that choir has been the most wonderful thing. It kind of brings the college and the university into contact with all sorts of areas of Oxford life we'd have no contact with. So, our recruitment is from Blackbird Leys, right across to North Oxford. And they're a wonderful group of people. And we're speaking at the beginning of September, but towards the end of August, we had a week when the girls were in rehearsing and recording and so on, and it was a lovely way to get ready for the new term.
Absolutely, an amazing start in life. I suppose that makes me think of your own start in life and Howells's music, because purely by chance I bumped into a recording on YouTube this morning of Norwich Cathedral Choir, and it was this a beautiful live recording from I think 1991 of Howells's Dallas service. Um, Conducted by your father, Michael Nicholas, and accompanied by Neil Taylor, and it's an electrifying performance. If for those who haven't heard it, go and seek it out. But I just wondered what was the first of Howells's music that you encountered, and what are the things that you learnt in those early days from your father, who obviously who not only performed that but recorded quite a lot of Howells's own music. What kind of lessons did you learn that you think you bring to your Howells performance today?
So I think my first memories of Howells's music were probably off a double LP that the Cathedral Choir at Norwich had recorded for Vista Records, I think in time for the Howells 90th birthday. And I think that double set of LPs includes Take Him Earth for Cherishing, as well as some of the canticle settings and so on. And I think the Cathedral Choir sounded really good at that point in the early 80s. I mean, I think the performance of Take Him Earth is really strong. And it's perhaps not a work that's so often done by cathedral choirs because it's so hard, isn't it? And I've just done it with the Eton Choral course. And gosh, it's an incredible piece to learn in a week with a group of singers who've never met each other. But it was wonderful to do it at Evensong just last Saturday here at Merton. And I think it's probably fair to say that, the students were just amazed to meet this piece, and to really get stuck into learning it. So I think that's my earliest memory of Howells's music. And then, of course, becoming a chorister, we sang a lot of it. I'd left the choir by the time they learnt the Dallas service.
Right.
But I remember my father telling me that the copies of the Dallas service were the last ones to come out of that publishing house, out of their factory. I think the factory was either closing down or moving, and these 30 copies escaped to Norwich just in the nick of time. And it is a remarkable setting. And I think I'm right in saying it's Howells's last setting
Mm.
of the Magenunk. And it's very moving the way um, at the words, he remembering his mercy, the music of the opening comes back. Um, I think it's very fine. My memory of it is that it's quite hard, um, like perhaps a lot of House's later music. But I think it's well worth the effort. And perhaps one day we'll be able to do it here at Merton.
Yeah, I think there's an intensity about that late music that is quite incredible, and the marriage of the words and this kind of pared down language, because he was constantly working at his musical language. It's never the same. I mean, I think we talk about Howells's music being kind of instantly recognizable because there are lots of traits that he loved and he used a lot, but at the same time, I'm amazed by just how much it changes and the subtlety. It's a bit like saying all Mozart sounds the same. Yes, on one level it does sound the same, but there's amazing levels of subtlety within it, and I think it's the same with Howells's music. Actually, one of the that brings me nicely onto the House of the Mind, because I think that's one of the anthems that you've recorded in this new project. This is a disc for Delphian, isn't it, of music by Herbert Howells and Ian Venables. Why record House of the Mind? I mean, it's one of my favourites, but how did you come across it?
So, well, it's not a piece I've known forever, but I certainly got to know it a few years ago through a number of very good recordings, including the Finzi Singers' very beautiful recording with Paul Spicer. And I remember reading that Howells had originally written it for strings and choir. And whilst on the various recordings, I've heard many brilliant organists realize the organ part, I was really struck when I read that it was originally scored for strings, because I think the sonority of the strings can bring a kind of very different intensity to the music. And I think Christopher Palmer has written about this in his book, this idea of the music being lit from behind by having the strings there. And I think that's absolutely true of House of the Mind. So when we were asked to record the Requiem by Ian Venables in its orchestrated version, I remember thinking that this might be an opportunity to investigate recording House of the Mind in its original version, because I certainly haven't come across a recording of the original. I'm sure there is one, but I haven't heard it. And I thought that would be a fascinating thing to do. So I was really glad that we had the resources during those recording sessions, to record House of the Mind. And I think it's a piece that the choir absolutely loved learning. I'm not sure that they would say that they loved it at the outset. I think it's, like a lot of great pieces, it grew on them. The text, the textures, the sonorities, the harmony, and so on, as they got more and more into it. When we recorded it, we were just really coming out of a whole period of not singing in the chapel. So to come back and to be able to prepare this Howells for recording was really very special. I felt it was just the right music to be doing for lots and lots of reasons. I do think that the original, the scoring for strings is a very important aspect of this piece. And of course, I know that we talked about this before, but looking at Howells's orchestration, if you like, it is fascinating how he enlarges the voices, how he, the octave doublings and so on, really add a sonority and add to the texture in a really very profound way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think very much like Take Him Earth, it's an anthem where just looking at the words alone sends shivers up my arms, because it's such an exciting text, and I think the choice of this 17th century text about looking inward and being very philosophical and yes, looking inward because I'm what's the line? It says, "There alone dwells solid rest." So if in this time of intensity and trauma, that actually all that you can find calm within yourself is kind of is the ultimate self-help kind of mantra, isn't it? In some ways, it seems very modern at the same time as being 17th century, and I think it meant a lot to him because it was actually commissioned for the ISM, you know, the Musicians Union. It's the Incorporated Society of Musicians, and they put in a chapel and a book of remembrance at St Sepulchre's Holborn, and this Howells wrote that as the anthem for that service. And hence why he wanted to include more musicians. So hence why the string players were important. Um, so I think actually it was a real statement about for him as an artist, and my personal feelings are that 1954, which was when he wrote House of the Mind and the Mrs. Sabronensis, was possibly Howells's top year for me.
It's
Um,
an amazing patch, isn't it? I mean, you're absolutely right that that mass is just incredible, and how wonderful that we have another recording, a wonderful recording, which I certainly enjoyed getting to know during the pandemic when there was much more time to listen to such things. But I on my gap year, I was at Chichester Cathedral, and I'd never come across the Chichester service until then. And in fact, it was during that year that the choir relearnt it. It's not something they'd sung for a very long time. And I was, um, really interested at the age of 17, as I was then, to learn more about how Howells wrote for particular buildings and the forces therein. And of course, the choir at Chichester is one of the smaller cathedral choirs, um, traditionally 12 choristers and 6 lay vicars. Um, and the momentum of that piece, I think, is beautifully worked out for small forces. But I was never forget, hearing the first entry in the Magnificat on the second interval, and thinking this is unlike any Howells I'd heard until that point. But I think that's from the 50s, isn't it? That setting, is it, or early 60s?
Early 60s, I think, yes. But yeah, it's I think what's really interesting about all of those Magnificat settings are just how different they are. Um, and everybody has their favorites, and certain ones are more prominent than others. But what I like is about the Chichester service, and quite a lot of those late settings is the sense that um, that you can have some doubt in life. I think I remember James Lancelot in Durham talking about a couple of Howells pieces where he felt that this was written by somebody who was really struggling with the big questions in the texts. And it wasn't being presented as this very big, full-blooded kind of Victorian presentation of the text, but it was these were Maganunks where um, you could hear the composer worrying about it, I think is how James put it. And it allowed for a world of doubt, and that's why I think those late settings, Chichester, Salisbury, um, Winchester, settings that I think let people in. You don't have to believe. It's okay. These are things to think about. Uh,
That suited Howells. Well, obviously suited Howells is his own kind of ambivalent beliefs.
Absolutely, yeah, 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 and yeah, a man who I think personally, from everything I've been studying and researching, I've described him consistently as an atheist throughout, but an atheist who really wanted to believe, and I think it's that for me, it's a bit like an actor. Where you might think of all the different ways in which you could say a particular text. So if you were rehearsing some Shakespeare, you would think about all the different ways in which it could be presented. And I think that Howells, the actor, I think is a really key thing to, particularly those texts that he sets a lot, like the Te Deum and the Magnificat and things like that. I wonder whether we could talk very briefly about the other two anthems that you recorded, Like as the Heart and Oh Pray for the Peace, two anthems that he composed during the Second World War, and out of a set of four of setting the Psalms. These are immensely popular. So, what made you want to have a go at recording these alongside the lesser known piece?
Well, um, when we started looking at this project with the Venables and House of the Mind, I didn't know that we would include these two anthems, simply because at the time, I don't think I knew of any arrangements for strings and choir of these pieces. But Andrew Millinger kind of pointed me to Howard's um, scoring of Like as the Heart. And I thought that would be a very interesting thing to look at. I mean, again, I think strings or the balance of strings and voices in this piece is a wonderful sonority. Um, of course, the group of four anthems I think were dedicated to Thomas Armstrong. So there's a nice Oxford connection. Obviously, he was organist of Christchurch, but he's um, granddaughter sings in a choir which I conducted till a couple of years ago. So I quite often saw the Armstrongs and was involved in Robert Armstrong's 90th birthday concert. So it was interesting to note that connection. Um, but what I was really struck by in the arrangement by Howard, and also your fantastic scoring of "O Pray for the Peace of Jerusalem," was the contrapuntal layers to the music, which sometimes on the organ, it's easy to forget how Howells was managing the polyphony, and to see it scored and hear it played by the strings was a wonderful reminder of his amazing craft in that area. So we have these fantastic harmonies, but also each of the lines is beautifully managed. And of course, with that kind of uh, scoring, that the strings are able to bring that out in a really subtle way. And that's something that certainly happens very successfully in "O Pray for the Peace of Jerusalem." I mean, perhaps just tell us a bit, if I might ask you a question, tell us a little bit about how you approach the scoring of "O Pray for the Peace," and what of Howells's work was in your mind? I mean, had you looked at the elegy for viola and quartet
Yeah,
and strings?
yeah, yeah. I, I suppose when I first considered Howard's arrangement, this is Howard Eckdahl. I was interested in the way that he was very respectful to the original, and it was almost as if Howard was imagining, the kind of bird pieces that could be played by viol consorts, or they could be played on the keyboard, and it was that kind of. And this is a period that inspired Howells so much. So I liked the kind of direct transfer in that, and I thought, well, this is going to work well, but I wanted to do something that contrasted to that, and I also wanted to do something that had echoes of the pieces that inspired Howells, because I think what you get in the House of the Mind scoring is a very kind of consistent approach to thinking about the string composers that inspired him. And this was early on was Elgar, because through a personal friendship, and Elgar suggested looking at the music of Handel a lot, and to look to really understand string writing and the contrapuntal stuff that you're talking about. Howells was also very taken by Purcell, so he looked at a lot of the string fantasies and things like that. So I was interested in that, and of course the Vaughan Williams Tallis Fantasia, which I think is the single work that inspired Howells the most during his lifetime. So I was thinking about all of that kind of music, and what the effect would be if I borrowed certain sonorities, because I think what when you're arranging something like that, you can do it very structurally. You can have certain sounds, and you just think, "Wow, that's an interesting chord," or it's an interesting spacing, and it in your ear suddenly takes you back to something else. And so there's a particularly quiet moment in the middle of "O Pray for the Peace of Jerusalem" where it goes, "Peace be within thy walls," and there's this magical F sharp um, chord, and I wanted that to sound just like the opening of the Tallis Fantasia. And if you look at the score, I've pinched it straight out of the and obviously changed the harmony, but it's that exact scoring because I wanted people. Not because I wanted to do something particularly academic, but because I wanted people who are listening to it suddenly have that memory of the Vaughan Williams alongside what they were listening to. And so I arranged it in bits like that. So there were certain sound moments throughout the piece. There's a big sound moment when there's a big 6/4 chord. After it all gets very worked up, and the organ comes in with its very, very loud entry, because that always struck me as harmonically the most exciting moment in the whole piece, and really the moment that Howells was working up to. So I wanted a string arrangement that had all of these memories in it, but also was structurally had this amazing sense of the arch of "O Pray for the Peace," because it has when the main tune comes back, it's gloriously nostalgic. It's almost like he's a friend said this recently. He taught us this beautiful tune at the beginning, and then when it comes back at the end, it's like we're encountering a friend again, and it's unbelievably emotional, and it's just a unison tune, isn't it? All the best moments in Howells tend to be the same with Col Reg Te Deum. It's this sense of all coming together. Which I think is really emotional, particularly after the COVID stuff and and all the isolation. So yes, that's how I had all of these moments that I wanted, and I just kept working at it, kind of section by section, completely out of order. To bring out all of the little bits of contrapuntal ingenuity, because there are all sorts of little interesting fragments, as you say, that you miss in the organ score. I've always played it and thought, I wish this was on different instruments. I wish it was in strings. And interestingly, his short scores for the string works, so the cello concerto short score, for example, looks texturally a lot like the organ works.
Right.
So there's that connection as well. I think often I wonder whether some of the organ works would work even better with strings. Certainly set one, number one of the Psalm preludes.
Yes.
So, or maybe even the first Rhapsody, which of course is again strikes me as a string work. Yeah, those undulating lines.
I,
Uh,
I wondered about the saraband from the partita, the one for Vaughan Williams's birthday.
yes,
I thought that would work well as a string orchestra movement.
absolutely.
Possibly not the whole of the partita, but um,
Yeah,
you know,
maybe.
I'm not sure that would work. But I think that movement, I've often thought when playing it, that somehow on the organ it's incredibly hard to give it the intensity that it needs. But I thought on strings it might work nicely. Perhaps that's something for Vaughan Williams's year next year.
Yeah, yeah. It was an interesting. We discussed that saraband, Stephen Clearbury and I a few years ago, because quite by chance we'd both programmed the Howells Partita on the same weekend in Cambridge. So so I went to hear him on Saturday night play it at King's, and then I played it the following night at Trinity. And we played the whole Partita. And Stephen's got a copy of the partita signed by Howells, which he played to Howells when he was at Westminster Abbey. And it was interesting talking to him about that because he felt that a lot of the detail was lost in King's. But you do get that immense sound world.
Yeah.
Whereas at Trinity, you got all of the detail and all of the excitement and the kind of rhythmic attack, but you don't get that kind of luxurious sound world. So
Of
it's
course, Howells wanted both, didn't he?
he did.
He,
He
he
wanted
wanted that rhythmic precision, and you wanted to hear it very rhythmically. Um,
Absolutely. And I
but
think now it's only really with recordings of the quality of that we're hearing, particularly in the last 5 years, the quality of Hyperion's release with the Mrs. Abronensis, and certainly the sounds that the, what I've heard already of the sneak preview of your Delphian recording, and also the Naxos recordings that have come out. I think they've really all benefited from the very latest recording techniques, because you can hear those sounds, all those details, but you can also have that sense of the acoustic. And so, for the first time, I think Howells's music is coming out in glorious Technicolor. But yeah, it's one of those things that we can do now. I mean, I wonder if you would say something very briefly about how you recorded the Howells
yeah,
because of the COVID situation, because it was in no way a standard recording, was it?
no, it certainly wasn't. No, I mean, in a way, it was madness to go ahead with a recording at a time when we had to be distanced. But when the recording was planned, I mean, the government had suggested that restrictions might be eased certainly earlier in June, which would enable us to have the choir standing together, and the orchestra sitting together. But neither of those things was possible in the end. So perhaps it was foolish to go ahead, but we had to be distanced, and the orchestra was up at the east end of the chapel and went right through the sanctuary as far as the lectern, and the choir was distanced from the lectern right down to the organ. So we covered the full length of the chapel, and of course I didn't know which way to face whilst conducting. So um, yeah, I mean it felt quite hard at times, to keep the momentum and so on, because of the sheer distance. And um, but it's all credit to the players and the singers that after a while they got used to doing what they had to do for it to give us a chance of sounding together.
Yeah, I think it was what you lost because it was hard to coordinate it. I think you made up for in the energy and the excitement of all the musicians, to be honest, because the choir was so pleased to be back and singing, and the string players were so excited to be having some live music, that I think there was nothing really quite like it. So I think people will really enjoy that intensity, because I think people really, particularly the string players, encountering the music for the first time, and the arrangements and things like that, really went for it. So
Yeah, they were thrilled to meet the music actually. Um, and of course, no one had played any of those house pieces before.
no,
In fact, no one had played a single note off the disc actually, because the Venables was newly orchestrated. Um, so yes, it was a voyage of discovery for everybody. But it was lovely for the choir to return to those pieces, having sung them with organ, to hear them in a new light.
yeah, and I think it made sense to pair it with a composer in Ian Venables, who has spoken often about how much he enjoys Howells's music and feels himself within that particular tradition. So it complements it superbly. Are we going to hear your first Rhapsody as well?
Do you know that the Delphian tell me that the maximum length of a disc is just over 80 minutes, and I think that the first Rhapsody takes us to about 86 minutes. Um, so we might not be hearing the first Rhapsody, but we will be hearing the Ian Venables Rhapsody
Super.
in
That's
memory of Howells.
yes. Yeah, yeah,
So I had hoped to have both Rhapsodies on, but I mean, it may be that the Howells comes out on the digital version, um, where you can obviously have something longer than 80 minutes. But I think the CD length may be a problem to include that, but
yeah.
perhaps another time.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for covering so much detail about this very exciting project. Do you have an idea about when the disc from Delphian will be released?
Yeah, it's June 22.
June 22. Super. So we can wait with bated breath for that fantastic release. Congratulations on bringing such an incredibly difficult project together in unbelievably difficult times. But I think I was looking at the manuscript for Like as the Heart the other day, and the words at the top, because it says they were going to be four anthems in time of war. And both the manuscripts and the letters from that period shows this intense struggle, and I think this music really has a lot to say to us and bring to us during these very difficult times recently with COVID. So yes, I think it's very appropriate. Anyway, congratulations,
Thank you.
and we really look forward to hearing the CD.
Good to speak to you today.